So last week we started a new sermon series with a simple premise that if Jesus was alive today, Jesus would be a surfer. Amen? Amen? And here's why we started with this premise, is that the story that we know about Jesus was that he took the common things of the ordinary life in the world that he lived, like farming and fishing, and used them as the avenue to teach about deeper spiritual things. And since we live in the best place in the whole entire world for surfing, I think that if Jesus was hanging out today, he'd have a surfboard under his arm, walking around town, talking to people about the way of God in the world by using the imagery from surfing. And so last week, we started by using the old slogan in surfing, never go alone. And that's the call of being a part of the community, that together we are stronger than we ever are apart. And when we're strong together, we can do remarkable things with each other, and for our world. And so today we turn to the second lesson from surfing that Jesus wants to teach us. Just think, him long hair, right? You can totally see it. To introduce this, there's a guy that I surf with that we have nicknamed the Wave Whisperer. He's this guy that is the best surfer out at the break, and he will sometimes wait for up to an hour for a wave. He sits intently looking at the horizon, eyeing up every swell that's coming in. And it isn't until a perfect wave comes that he suddenly turns and starts to paddle. As he starts to paddle, everyone else at the break stops. And we all turn to watch him do his magic of surfing. And every wave that he picks is remarkably good. It's the best wave of the day normally. And he jumps up on his board and takes off down the line. And we all stand or sit in amazement with this guy's ability. When I first started surfing at this break, I noticed that they would always scream at me, "Go, go, go, go!" And so I'd paddle for waves, and I started realizing that every wave I caught was what we call closeouts. What does that mean? The wave comes and just dumps, and there's nowhere to go. And I noticed that none of those guys ever paddled for those waves. They sat screaming, "Go, go, go, go!" And I quickly realized that what they were doing was getting me out of the way for the good waves. So one day I went up to the whisperer of waves and said to him, "What are you doing? And you sit here for such a long period of time. What are you looking for?" And he began to tell me about what he does out there. Partly it's a meditative state of just being in the ocean, but the other part is that he says you have to realize what time it is in terms of high tide or low tide. And so I position myself based on the tide over this reef because I know where it's going to break. And I look at the wave that's coming in, the angle of the wave, the size, and start paying attention to all these elements. And as I'm watching and I'm looking down the line of this wave, I can tell if it's going to peak up or if it's going to be a closeout. And that's when I tell you to go. But if we see him turning to paddle, we know that something really good is coming. And he'll jump up and take off in a way that I can only dream of doing one day. He shared with me that he's been surfing the same spot for 40 years. In those 40 years, what he has learned is to discern and read the waves. In the Christian faith, this word, reading the waves, is what we use, discernment. Discernment. We talk about discerning the Spirit, discerning what God is inviting us to do and who we're called to be. In the world of surfing, discernment is looking and seeing which is good and which is bad. So what is discernment? Discernment in the Christian ideal is this idea of understanding or being able to distinguish between wisdom and folly, between good and evil, between right and wrong. But it's even deeper than that. Discernment in the Christian tradition is this belief that we have the ability to connect with God's heart to better understand what God is wanting in our world and in our lives to carry it out. After I took a surf lesson, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about surfing. And then I went out the second time and realized I knew nothing about surfing. And then I went out with people from the church that kept teaching me more techniques and things to watch out for. And after many years of continuing to make a fool of myself on a surfboard, I've learned that it takes time to learn the gift of reading the waves. In the Christian life, it takes time for us to learn how to discern the voice of God. So maybe you've already experienced discernment. Have you ever had a gut feeling that you're drawn to something or not to something? Or that feeling that the hairs raise up on your body that something is going on? That's discernment. And if we dive into this faith deep enough, what you start doing is paying attention to all these nonverbal cues that the Spirit is nudging us towards. And as the Spirit nudges us, we begin to learn how to distinguish the voice of God and the voice of self or others. And so today, we turn to this book of 1 John. 1 John, 5 chapters, super easy to read. I'd encourage you to go home and read this book. 1 John is written by a guy by the name of John. And literally, the most important passage maybe in all of the Scripture is found in 1 John 4:8. It's the bedrock that we build everything else off of. God is love. You can memorize that, right? God is love. And everything else is built off of that premise, that the world and the cosmos that we're a part of is given out of God's love. God's coming to us in the person of Jesus Christ, it's out of God's love. God's continually inviting us to be a part of God's story because of God's love. And so it's the foundational belief of our faith that God is love. And anything that isn't love isn't God. And so this book of 1 John helps us understand what it means to follow Jesus and love each other. He uses this word love a lot in this book because what he's doing is trying to get the community of faith to understand that this ideal of love isn't some romantic feeling, but it's a way of life together. And so as we look at this book, I think there's three primary storylines in the book by three words that are repeated over and over again throughout 1 John. The three words are life, light, and love. Life, light, and love. And he keeps doing a circular argument in which he keeps going around the circle with those three words in the community of faith. That we are called to be a people of life, of light, and of love. And so what does that mean with discernment? Well, our passage today comes right before the statement, God is love. The passage that we read today is about discerning or testing the spirits. What's happening in this church is they're going through some division. And this is the story of most churches, is that people have their own agendas. They're teaching something different than what they've already been taught, the way of Christ. And the problem that he's struggling with is how do we continue to learn how to distinguish between the things of God and the things of people, leading people astray. So he uses this really strong language like the Antichrist. How many of you want to be nicknamed Antichrist? Right? It's horrible, right? But what he's trying to make the point is quit paying attention to these people that are leading you astray. They may sound good, they may act good, but look at the life that they're living and what they're calling you to. And so these three words, life, light, and love, for me are the words of discernment. If you want to understand how to discern God in the world, you need these three words. First one, life. From the very beginning story of creation, God creates humanity out of the dust of the earth, the scriptures say, and then breathes into the nostrils the breath of life. Then Jesus comes along on the scene and starts teaching and says this profound idea, I came to give life and to give it abundantly. God is always about life. And life is that which bolsters us up. And so when you're discerning, if you're discerning something that might be good for you and bad for everyone else, it's most likely not from God. If God is about life, an abundant life, not material possession, but quality and goodness of life, then what our choices reflect ought to be life-giving. If it takes away life from another person or yourself, it's not life-giving. I don't think God's a cosmic police officer with a list of do's and don'ts. I think God constantly invites us into a way of living so that we can experience the fullness of life. And so, for example, if you are in bad habits of doing things that hurt you and hurt others, it's not because God's angry with you. God hurts because you hurt and realizes the hurt that reverberates out from that. And so God is about life. God is about giving us life, giving us a full life, giving us all of life. And so that's the first part of discernment. Second is light. John's gospel starts with this imagery of darkness and light. And the darkness can never overwhelm the light because light always illumines the darkness. Light is that which brings life to bear on earth, right? For the most part, we need light in order for photosynthesis to happen that sustains all of us by being able to breathe, right? And so light is this thing that illumines the dark places of our world, and if we're honest, of our lives. There's no such thing as all good people or all bad people. We're a mixture of the both. And light is this invitation to allow that light to shine in the crevices of our lives so that we can see clearly who we are and live into a fullness of life. None of us are ever going to be perfect. But the gift of God is an invitation to be light bearers. I remember as a kid, I was taught one of the only songs I remember of church was Using My Finger. Do you remember the song? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. It's the most simplistic song you can imagine. And yet it's deeply impactful. You are light. Jesus says to us, the followers, you are the light of the world. Not just he, you, us. And so if we're doing something, discernment is it bringing God's light into the world? Are we able to stand up and bear the truth and show the light shining in us? So life, light, and lastly, love. Love is the basis of our faith. And love, oftentimes, if you've grown up in a dysfunctional home, you understand that love sometimes can be conditional. And the notion of God's love is that it's never on condition, but it's forever and always perfect. It's unconditional, unmerited. It's just there. And that you and I are dared to live out that love together. It bears all things and hopes all things. It endures all things, 1 Corinthians 13 says. This love that has been poured out into us is called agape love, otherworldly, godly love. And so for us to discern the spirits of our day and age, we have to ask, does this love represent a fullness of love or a condition to get love? And if it's a condition to get love, it's not God's love. Because God's love is always constant and present. And so for us to be able to discern the spirits, to read the waves of our culture and our day, we need to look at how does it bring life, how does it shine light, and how does it bear the resemblance of God's love in our world. And if we discern clearly and correctly, what we discover is that God is all about goodness and celebration and giving life to this world, and that we get to participate in it. I have this dream that tomorrow morning when I wake up and go out to surf, I'm going to be a wave whisperer. The swell is up this week, and I'm going to look at this wave coming in, and all the guys are going to stop paddling and go, 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 go. And it's going to be this beautiful wave, and I jump up, and I take off down the line, and they take pictures of me. And then I'll wake up from my dream, and I'll go out, and I'll practice trying to discern how to ride the waves, realizing that sometimes I'll get lucky, and sometimes I'll miss it. But the reality is that in our time and our space, God invites us to keep discerning who we are called to be, where we're called to go, and how we're called to live. For God is all about life, all about light, and all about love. So may we live in it together. Amen.